The fall of the Soviet Union, the breakdown in relations with various international powers, and sanction after sanction have created enormous pressure on the Russian economy since the formation of the Russian Federation in the 1990s. Despite all this, Russia's economy is still booming. One would have expected significant blows to the Russian economy following Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision to launch the largest land invasion in Europe since World War II into neighboring Ukraine. Despite the inability of the Russian army to secure the quick victory they had promised, and despite having been hit with the most comprehensive sanctions in recent history, the Russian economy has defied all odds and exceeded even the most optimistic predictions. While the rest of the world expected their economy to be crippled by the sanctions lobbied against them, Russia's economy is still growing. According to the IMF, Russia's GDP growth rate is expected to rise by 3.2% in 2024, outpacing advanced economies like Germany, which is projected to have a growth rate of 0.2%. Japan, which is projected to be 0.9%, and even the US, which is forecast to have a GDP growth rate of 2.7%. The last few years have been a rough time for the global economy in general, especially with the rise in inflation post the global pandemic. And while inflation did rise in Russia, it wasn't by as much as most countries in the European Union. It is not all sunshine and rainbows though. While inflation didn't rise as much as expected, the Russian ruble did take a nosedive following the invasion of Ukraine, falling as low as 130 to the dollar before stabilizing at around its current level of 92 to the dollar. Despite all this, Russia has been experiencing an increase in revenue and its greatest trade surplus since its formation in 1991 following the fall of the Soviet Union. This is for a plethora of reasons, and in this video, we'll be diving into why Russia's once pathetic economy is still booming and whether it's just a fluke or the result of careful planning. Make sure you watch the full video, as at the end, we'll reveal some of the cunning tactics Putin is currently employing to evade the sanctions. The key to this mystery was seeded long before the Russian-Ukrainian war. It all started with the Soviet Union, the perseverance of its people, and the political economy that Vladimir Putin has carefully molded over the last 23 years. As you might expect, Russia was badly affected by the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, as it had been the single largest member of the Communist Union and the seat of power for the Union. Throughout the 1990s, the budding federation's economy drastically contracted by over 50%, causing hyperinflation, leading to a rise in social dysfunction, poverty, corruption, and a massive brain drain as a huge number of Russia's best young talents left for greener pastures in other countries. But over the years, especially past the 2010s, the Russian economy has slowly started to regain its former glory, enough to threaten some of the greatest powers, not only militarily, but also economically. To truly appreciate how this has been possible, you must first understand the master plan of the Soviet Union. In the late 1960s, the Soviet Union found itself in a dire situation. Its economy was beginning to stagnate despite its massive growth and impressive feats, such as launching the first satellite and man into space, and its program of massive militarization and industrialization that put it on the map as a superpower alongside the United States. Why was this? Well, the Soviet Union at the time was a totalitarian communist state in which everything from the price of goods to salaries and even industrial output was dictated and managed by the state. Initially, this was good for the economy, as it allowed the government to shift millions of peasants from their position in inefficient small-scale farms to industries and workshops, increasing productivity. However, once in employment, the plan didn't provide any scope to grow productivity further, meaning that the economy had little ability to grow past where it had been taken. This was because by moving citizens from farms to industries and providing them with equal salaries and an expected quota, it killed whatever drive or desire workers might have to work harder, work more efficiently, or even innovate. This was a pretty obvious problem, and the government tried to improve the situation by introducing wage reforms as incentives, But it still wasn't enough to keep up with Western economies that encouraged competition, efficiency, and innovation amongst its workers and corporations to fuel growth. The solution of opening up the economy was clear, but was ignored by the state, as any attempt to emulate the systems of Western economies would not only have meant reducing government power, it would have also dealt a significant blow to the communist ideology, potentially leading to the collapse of the Soviet regime. To solve this issue, Russia turned towards developing its large and inhospitable, but resource-rich, regions in the Soviet Union such as Siberia and the Arctic regions. To accomplish this, tens of millions of people were used to build massive infrastructure and new towns, and connect the very vital gas and oil fields abundant in those regions. The completion of these projects couldn't have come at a better time for the Soviet Union because, due to the outbreak of a war in the Middle East, the major oil-producing countries in the region decided to embargo the Western world, leading to an oil crisis that saw the global price of energy skyrocket by sixfold in just 8 years. This allowed the Soviet Union to quickly enter the vacuum left by the embargo, selling its vast reserves of oil to its capitalist rivals and allowing it to accumulate vast amounts of money. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union had become the largest producer of oil in the world. The vast wealth gained from its oil-producing capabilities allowed it to continually finance its enormous military and subsidize its inefficient industry, covering for its flaws. But this would eventually come to an end, as the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan caused its economy to enter a period known by its citizens as the Great Stagnation. In addition, the increase in the oil production of countries like Saudi Arabia caused the value of Soviet oil to drastically reduce, shaking their economy and, eventually, following the subsequent fall of the Soviet Union, crippling it. If you want to stay updated on the latest global financial news and money topics that can help you build your wealthy life, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Okay, moving on. The fall of the Soviet Union was the largest geopolitical and economic shift in the 20th century, and its effect was felt all over the world as the once highly regulated and intricate system that governed every facet of the Union was gone almost overnight. Institutions crumbled, employment was uncertain, and the state was lacking in financial resources to support itself and its citizens, leading to a situation in which massive industries remained stagnant. But from the ashes of the behemoth of the Soviet Union, a new democratic government arose to alleviate the situation by implementing drastic cuts to government spending on the military and industry subsidies. This was done to not only reduce government spending, but also as a form of shock therapy to force the various former Soviet industries to reform, adapt, and adopt the system of their former capitalist rivals. These reforms would initially hit the people and the economy like a truck, but with time, it slowly began to revitalize and grow the economy. To understand one of the reasons why the economy is yet to collapse, we must take a look at the most influential Russian leader in over half a century, Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin came into power amidst the Second Chechen War, and due to a largely successful military campaign and economic growth, he quickly became Russia's most popular politician, beloved by millions of people. Due to this, President Yeltsin resigned in 1999 and appointed Putin as acting president. To improve Russia's economic growth and get it back on track, Putin introduced a comprehensive agenda and campaign against crime and corruption and a drive to encourage international integration and investment. This agenda had an effect, and when implemented, it brought about a massive increase in economic growth and production, and, to take it further, the government took back control of large oil and gas assets, like Gazprom. Due to this and a boost in oil production, Russia had a budget surplus, which it then used to reform antiquated and dilapidated public infrastructure and investment in various sectors, allowing the economy to regain some of its life. Russia continued to grow, but a drastic change in foreign policy threatened to take this all away. Annexing Crimea and supporting separatists in Ukraine not only earned the ire of Western nations, but also put former members of the Soviet Union on guard against them. Western nations like the US, Germany and the UK made their anger known by throwing sanctions at Russia, such as freezing assets, banning the sale of key technical components of weapon systems, and restricting loans to certain sectors of the economy, such as their energy sector. To counter this, Russia tried its best to be sanction-proof by rapidly modernizing its military, investing in homemade technology, and exchanging its foreign reserves in dollars for euros and the Chinese yuan, reducing the impact of the sanctions on them. But the invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, caused Western nations to slap further, even heavier sanctions on Russia, crippling its economy and its military. This quickly led to an economic war that saw a lot of Western brands and businesses, like McDonald's, Coca-Cola and Starbucks, leaving Russia and outright denying services to Russia in general. Russia fired back by cutting gas to countries highly dependent on their gas like Germany, embargoing wheat transport from Ukraine, affecting global food prices and oil prices. The effect of these sanctions was terrible in that they made the Russian currency crash by over 50%, caused inflation and unemployment, and caused airline prices to double. But despite all this, the economy was able to get back on its feet and slowly recover. While the sanctions dealt a massive blow to the Russian economy, it wasn't as much as was initially predicted. While inflation did rise, their GDP barely shrank, leading one to ask, how did they do it? Well, to cushion the effects of inflation and unemployment, interest rates were raised to encourage citizens who had taken money out of their banks during the pandemic and the beginning of the war to deposit that money back. Another measure Putin's government introduced was subsidies for private industries and the banning of the exportation of foreign currency, causing companies selling overseas to have no other choice but to buy back rubles, inflating the value of the currency. All these, coupled with Russia's very low foreign debt, reducing their reliance on Western financing, currency and consumer products, and investment in private businesses, have allowed them to wade through the storm of the sanctions, grow, and still have enough to keep on fighting their war. Another major contribution to Russia's growth is the transformation of its economy into a war economy. Nations at war need to spend a lot on new military equipment, from clothing its soldiers to building tanks and manufacturing ammunition. Russia is no different, and it has prioritized the production of these items over almost anything else, pouring its money and resources into the war effort. This focus on war production has boosted economic activity in Russia due to the increase and reliance on homemade equipment and products, leading to a rise in its GDP. But the major reason for Russia's continued perseverance and resistance to the effects of Western sanctions is mainly thanks to its oil dominance. Russia's dominance when it comes to oil production and energy production can be said to be its greatest inheritance from the Soviet Union. Its vast natural resources allow it to have a chokehold on European countries, like Germany, who are dependent on its oil, and also allows it to retain and build international relations with neutral countries or countries who may have their own issues with the West. Russia produces more than 10% of the world's oil supply, behind only the US and Saudi Arabia. Cutting off all energy exports would have driven up the price of oil everywhere. So, Western countries, led by the United States, hatched something of a compromise by imposing a price cap. Russia could continue selling its oil and using registered shipping vessels with insurance only if that oil was sold for less than $60 per barrel. This was intended to limit Putin's war chest, as Russia's oil money has traditionally funded most of his budget, and initially it hit the Russian economy hard with oil exports dropping significantly. However, in response to these sanctions, Russia soon switched to supplying new markets like China, Turkey and India that didn't impose sanctions on it. For example, Russia's trade with China has increased by more than 90% from the beginning of the war to December 2023. And as you can see from this chart, China is now the nation buying by far the most fossil fuels from Russia. You can also see that the EU remains reliant on Russian fossil fuels, despite the huge sanctions it has placed on Russia in the last 2 years. In order to bypass the price cap set by Western countries, Russia has brought out of retirement a fleet of old oil tankers which would have otherwise been heading for the scrap heap and put them to work in transporting its oil. This so-called shadow fleet of tankers are able to operate outside the standard Western insurance, financial and shipping service circles, meaning they are not subject to the same obligations regarding price limits as tankers from companies registered in the Western coalition countries imposing price restrictions. At first, Russia was covert in its efforts to use the shadow fleet, but it has grown increasingly brazen, noting that there are now hundreds of shadow vessels moving oil. The shadow fleet now plays a crucial role in moving Russian crude oil to China and other Asian ports. And some of these tankers may later refine the crude oil in countries like India and even re-export it to the very Western nations who are imposing the sanctions. All these factors have allowed Russia to keep afloat, grow, and continue funding its war effort, surpassing all previous expectations. If you want to learn more about the current state of the US economy, click on this next video where we cover just that. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep building your wealthy life.